Welcome to this week's video. We are already on week 3. Can you believe it? We have already halfway to our first exam. We have one more week of content, and then we'll have some review materials, and then it is time for our first exam. So before I talk about a couple of content related items, I want to remind you that exams for this course, yes, it's an online course, but exams have to be proctored. And because of the technology that we use, we haven't found an effective way to do those proctors online and allow you access to the StatCrunch and D2L Dropbox that you need access to, while also making sure that all of that's being monitored and it's not too onerous on you. So for now, those need to be proctored in person, and you can come to our testing center to do that, or if you're at a different location, you can contact a local library or a community college or some other testing center and coordinate that. We've had military officers coordinate that with we've had military personnel coordinate that with their officer, and that's fine as well. All right, for today, this week in Chapter 3, we're going to start doing our first calculations. And before I talk about a couple of items, let me just remind you and mention that you should not be doing calculations by hand. Don't calculate things by hand. That is what StatCrunch is for. StatCrunch is going to make your life a lot easier. So there's some links in D2L. I'll put them down below too about the key Chapter 3 StatCrunch skills, and you're going to want to use that for everything. If there's something challenging later on in the semester and you can't find a video for it, maybe it's something I left out, but email me. Don't be doing a lot of these messy calculations with these big tables by hand. Okay, so a couple of things we're going to be looking at here. This section, this chapter, is about measures of center. So if you have a variable and it's spread out, where is its center? And then a measure of spread. One measure of center is the mean. One measure of spread that's common is the standard deviation. So to illustrate this, I thought I would look at some of this school data, Illinois school data. And one measure that we have is the average ACT for these high schools. And what's interesting is there's different categories of the school districts. So some school districts are the high school only, like there might be a couple of high schools in that school district or in that area in that city, and that's a separate district from the elementary and middle schools. Whereas other districts like the Elgin area, school district U46, and I think most of the other districts in our area as well, they're a one big unit school district. So if we look at the average ACT and we separate it by schools that are high school only and schools that are unit, we get these two different distributions. You can see that the high school only, kind of a funky distribution, whereas the unit school districts, much more symmetric. I think that's because there's more of them. But the mean for the high school only districts, I believe, is a 20.9. That's the average ACT score for those schools. And then the standard deviation is 2.6. And then for the unit school districts, they have a lower mean, 19.3, and also a smaller standard deviation, 2.4. One thing we might suspect from looking at this is like, well, it seems like we should just be doing all school districts that have only high schools in them. Keep the elementary schools separate. The danger there is that we did not do an experiment. Now, clearly these two types of school districts are different, but we don't know why. It could just be that certain types of communities tend to do a unit school district, and other types of communities tend to keep the high schools separate and have a separate high school district. And so before we make this big judgment about, well, let's do these kind of school districts because the students do better, what if we look at another variable? So I looked at another variable, which is the percent of students that are low income. And if we look at those two histograms, it's very enlightening. We can see that for the high school only districts, tend to be between 20 and 50 or 20 and 60% low income. And the unit school districts, there's a chunk of those, a little more bell-shaped there, but then there's also this spike where there's many of them are almost all low income. And what we're going to find out later on this semester, we're going to do some analysis that there's a strong correlation between the percent of students that are low income and the average ACT at that high school. And so maybe it isn't necessarily the district structure necessarily as the composition of the students. So we have to be careful looking at these. Yes, there are different means, but because we just did an observational study, just looked at existing data, we can't claim a causation there. So just a couple of things to get you thinking about: measure of center, measure of spread, looking at the distribution shapes for those as well. We've got a lot more to work on this week. As usual, lots of homework. We've got, I think, 5 sections of homework, 4 or 5 sections of homework. You'll have a quiz on Friday as well, so work hard. Email me if you have questions, and I will talk to you soon. And the next new video will be about our first exam.